To unpack the real issues affecting the Tasman nations, this is Trans-Tasman Talk. Jointly produced by the Unshackled.net and rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Dewey DeBoer in New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Trans-Tasman Talk for another week. It's 6:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Australia.
And it's 9:30 p.m. here in Auckland, New Zealand. And the reason for that extra time difference is daylight savings started this week in New Zealand, and we're always the first in the world to do these things, and Australia is lagging 1 week behind. So we compromised a little bit as Australia and New Zealand do, and we sort of met halfway in the middle of the Tasman this time. And so that's why we're half an hour early for you Australians, and we are half an hour late for our Kiwi audience.
Yeah, so it's just for this week because daylight savings. A reminder to those in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide and Tasmania to turn your clocks an hour forward, because in Queensland, Northern Territory and Western Australia don't have daylight savings, and so we have, let me see, 5 time zones during daylight savings in Australia. It's a nightmare.
We keep it nice and simple here, and we do have another time zone out closer to the international dateline, but all of New Zealand, all of the main islands of New Zealand are all under one time zone, thankfully.
Well, the states of Queensland and WA, they've had public votes on daylight savings, but they don't want them. They think that, well, the allegation always is that it's going to lead to the moral decay of society, that it's going to lead to family breakdowns, as if that hasn't happened already.
It's catastrophic, and I think it's proof that there are some things that we just shouldn't let people vote on. You know, I'm all for democracy, but we should force daylight savings on everybody.
You have public votes in New Zealand, citizen-initiated referendums, but the government always pretty much ignores them.
Not just pretty much, but always. Every single one we've had 7, unless I've lost count, and every single one of those has been ignored. So when there is a citizens-initiated referendum, we know that what the government is going to do is the exact opposite of what the people will vote for. So it's nice and straightforward.
Yeah, so they sort of allow you to vote, but they have the final veto. It's kind of like the EU.
But yeah, it's our little experiment. But there is a party that wants to make them binding. That's the New Conservative Party, and it's not a policy people talk about much, but they are very excited about it, and I think it would make for some interesting changes to New Zealand.
Yes, definitely. Well, I asked you last week because Australia had their climate strikes, mainly led by students, but also were attended by workers, and it turned out state and local government employees from those state and local governments which wanted to virtue signal on climate change. And I asked you about New Zealand, but you had yours a week later, last Friday. Why was that?
I think of maybe some union negotiations, to make sure that everything lined up for all of the different government departments to join in protest. We had all of the, and it was the last, sorry, I should just skip straight to the real reason, which is it was the last day of school. And so they arranged the climate strike to be on the last day of school so that all the students could skip the final day, and so it wouldn't interfere with anything important like exams or something, because when you're trying to save the world, you've got to make sure you can take, give it a good long, extra long school holiday. And we had a lot of businesses, probably mainly government departments, join in as well. And we very proudly had the highest rate of strike out of any country in the world. 3.5% of the New Zealand population joined in the strikes. 170,000 people, that's the number they reported.
And I mentioned last week, or were they going to be big climate strikes because, say Jacinda Ardern, the progressive poster girl, is your prime minister. But I saw some of the interviews with students from the climate strike, and they said, no, she's not doing enough. But the main demand was for her to declare a climate emergency.
Yes, obviously all of the Green MPs are out striking as well. Ministers of the government striking to make sure that get the government to do more. And I was a little bit wrong last week. I will admit that. I thought not much would come of this because they've got the government that's supposed to be doing what they wanted. Right. This is the reason why Jacinda was elected, pretty much, because she was this climate change was going to be her nuclear-free moment, and. People are disappointed, and I explained the reasons last week as to why she can't really go ahead with all of these things because it will damage the economy and so on. And they're realizing they can't go ahead with all of these broad ideas. But the climate emergency is always a symbolic gesture, and I'm really surprised she hasn't gone for the climate emergency. And I suspect very much that Winston Peters is holding up some kind of vote on that.
Oh, you mean that he's actually got some influence with Jacinta?
Yes. There's different people on the right tend to complain that Winston Peters does nothing and is useless, and people on the left complain that he controls absolutely everything that goes on. So you have a very polarized view of Winston Peters, where half of the country thinks that he's the evilest man alive, and the other half also thinks he's the evilest man alive, but for different reasons.
Now, we are both broadcasting live on the Unshackled's YouTube channel and the Right Minds YouTube channel. I'm actually checking out the Right Minds YouTube chat at the moment, and I noticed that, do you know the Medicine Man? He's the main commentator in the Right Minds chat.
I see. I've never heard of him before. He doesn't sound very happy, though.
Okay. Well, he's a Kiwi, so he's a pretty active YouTuber.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check him out.
Yeah,
I'll check him out.
Check him out. Though I know that you're more moderate than others, so you might find it quite an interesting channel.
I know there are a lot of interesting New Zealand channels. New Zealand is very famous for having lots of interesting, colourful people, so I look forward to it.
But the history is always you all don't know each other. Like there's heaps of different New Zealand YouTubers, and you're one of the leading alt media outlets in New Zealand. There's sort of in Australia much more of a connectedness.
Yes, and I'm not really necessarily sure why that is, but I suspect it's because people tend to disagree and then not get, I've noticed a lot of that is that if there's one difference, one major issue people disagree on, then they'll never talk to each other ever again. I think you may have a bit more of a friendly thing going on in Australia than we do here.
Even though we're a much larger country.
Yeah, I think that helps really, as the smaller the country, and people tend to, you have smaller audiences and so on, a smaller market. Yeah.
Now, I was surprised that Jacinta, in her response to declaring a climate emergency, as you pointed out, it's symbolic, and Jacinta said, it's only symbolism around an emergency. What people want for us is to make progress. And I was shocked that a progressive leader doesn't want to virtue signal. And I still find it hilarious that these climate activists, they say the world's going to end in 10, 12 years' time, and the first thing they want governments to do is virtue signal by basically, I don't know, do you break some emergency glass and say climate emergency?
Yes, that's the most important thing to do, and the whole kind of left wing is all about virtue signaling. So, the reason she hasn't done it yet must be Winston Peters, else she would do it. And she's rationalized that. She's come up with a right-wing excuse for not doing it, basically, because she doesn't have any other excuse. But she did give some fabulous speeches at the United Nations over the past week. She announced that we live in a globalized, borderless world, and that leaders have a duty to care not just about their own people, but about all the people in the world. And so, with one stroke of her pen, she has made herself the unelected leader of the planet, and she would like to be the most progressive, the most progressive leader and care about everybody. But New Zealand population is starting to wonder if she's ever going to come back home and deal with the problems that we're having here.
Some quick math. So there's 4 million people in New Zealand, and there's now 7 billion people in the world. So if Jacinta is the global prime minister, then how much of a percentage then would she spend on New Zealand based on that?
I'm not going to do the math on air on a live
But
show.
you can,
That's always embarrassing.
Yeah, but you can. You get my point.
0.0000 something percent. And yeah, that's the way that I fear that we will end up being treated, is kind of more of a joke than anything else. And she's announced a climate like a free trade, but climate, like free climate trade. We'll come up with a catchy name for it later. But there are 5 different countries in the world, including Norway and Fiji, who have signed up to remove tariffs on green energy and components for solar farms and things. I suppose on rare earth minerals like cobalt as well, because we need all of that for our solar panels. These nations altogether make up 0.3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And that's kind of a big, the big deal that she's managed to walk away with.
We have got a super chat on the Unshackled channel's live chat. It's from Port Film Co-op. It's for $2 He says, "Is this Kiwi trying to outdo Steele's hobo chick?" I think he's talking about your beard. Is he implying that? Sort of, yeah, it's making you look a bit hobo-ish. He'll correct me in the comments if I'm wrong.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'll get it cleaned up for next week a little bit. But I'm not trying to compete with anybody really.
I noticed a couple of weeks back getting quite out of control, but it's a bit better now. Your lovely wife Amy, I'm sure she'll do something about that.
Yeah, she'll take care of it. She'll be watching this, and she'll have the trimmer ready when I'm done here. So we had I mentioned last week about the abortion bill in front of New Zealand Parliament at the moment. The submissions for that just closed that week, and the committee has announced that there were 23,000 submissions, which is the most that have been received on any bill ever. The previous one being the euthanasia one last week at 16,000. And the committee is on a short timeline, and as I've said, because unlike New South Wales, we do allow a little, at least the semblance of democracy, but they've only allowed 25% of the people who wish to make an oral submission to the committee to make one. So there is a lot of uproar here in New Zealand now that 75% of the people who wanted to make their views known to the committee in person have been rejected.
Well, as I said to you previously, it's still more consideration than the people of New South Wales got on their abortion bill, which has now passed both the upper and lower house. So abortion is decriminalised now in New South Wales, but the pro-life Liberal MPs, who, as I reported, they attempted to implement a spill motion against Liberal Premier Gladys Berejiklian. It was aborted at the last minute. I thought this was an extreme course of action by them. They also, 2 of them also threatened to move to the cross benches in the lower house, and because Gladys Berejiklian, she only has a 2-seat majority, she'd be in minority government. It was led, these pro-life Liberal rebel MPs, by Tanya Davies. She used to be the Minister for Women in the previous term of government, but she got dumped post the election. So she was the spearhead of this, and like I said, I was uneasy about their extreme tactics, but they ended up getting the job done and got significant amendments to make the bill less horrible than, well, any bill that legalizes abortion is horrible, but less horrible. So there's more protections to protect life after 22 weeks, such as providing counselling. There's also amendments were accepted to prevent women being coerced into an abortion, because that's something in the migrant communities where if they're having a girl, for example, there's pressure on from cultural reasons to abort the girl, and there's also on that matter, there's going to be information gathered on sex-selective abortions, information provided to prevent that, and also protection for those babies that are born alive after an abortion. So a slightly more humane bill, which I don't... because the person that introduced it, Alex Greenwich, independent MP for Sydney, he basically copied what was all in the other states, but there's nobody in the pro-abortion community who says, hey, maybe we shouldn't kill babies that are born alive.
It comes across as very weird when you think about it, and I wrote in my submission against our abortion bill that this is kind of should be viewed more of an element of human sacrifice and a revival of the pagan sacrifices, and that's why they don't want to see any kind of restrictions on these things. And obviously, my position is that they should be abolished completely. And we'll see whether in New Zealand we get any of these amendments added on. I don't think they're going to make too much of a difference. But I'm surprised that Australia decided to put some kind of protections against sex-selective abortion, because I argue that in the interests of multiculturalism, that should actually be, there's a reason why they should allow that if they really are committed to multiculturalism. So I'm surprised they backed off on that.
I've got another super chat on the Unshackled's YouTube live chat. It's from Senator Slayer, which is Neil Erickson, one of our local patriot activists. It's for $2 Australian. He says, is it true Steele wrote the anti-Trump dossier? No, I don't think he wrote any pissing stories, so no.
We will cover the Australian connection to that later on in the show, though, I believe.
Now, obviously, last week, both Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison, they were at the UN when Greta Thunberg, the apparent global voice of the children, did her famous "How dare you" speech. You stole my childhood and my dreams. But I'm not sure if you saw later in the week, they let her go to a press conference, sit in a press conference, and they asked her a bit more detail about that, and she's like, I sort of meant this, us the other people. Yeah.
Now, I did see the clip from that press conference, which was quite sad. And I had previously written that, her speech writers were not very good. And it's clear that obviously she was using speech writers. And I think the whole situation is just very, very sad how they've exploited this girl to propel her onto the world stage to make something happen. And it's clear that she's not really, she can't handle an interview.
Now, Jacinda Ardern was asked about Greta Thunberg, and she said, I don't think that the criticism of her is fair. I do think we need climate advocates. But then she said it certainly wouldn't be easy having been thrust upon the world stage in that way, but I have deep admiration for her. So Ardern basically admitted that, yeah, she's being used.
Yeah. I think those comments from Jacinda are actually good, and she genuinely believes in the climate change, or I don't think she believes climate change is that catastrophically imminent. After all, if she really did believe it, she would be actually implementing all of these policies incredibly rapidly, which she can't do. So she's not she's more on our side on this issue than we may be led to believe.
Maybe that was a cryptic message there from Jacinta.
Yeah, she's dog whistling.
Now, she was also asked about the Nobel Prize, because some in the media think that she should be a nominee for the Nobel Prize, and apparently she is the second most respected leader in the world. The highest one is Bill and Melinda Gates. Again, Jacinda Ardern, she's more popular on the world stage than actually the nation that she's supposed to be governing. Of course, Greta Thunberg is nominated for a Nobel Prize, and I did like Trump saying that if the Nobel Prize criteria was fair, I would have heaps of reasons to be nominated.
Yes, there's always hit and miss there because the Nobel Prize winners include Barack Obama, who was very famous for all of his drone strikes in the Middle East and Africa, and going all the way back, you've got wonderful people like a certain German leader who managed to make it, or not that was not Nobel, I believe, but he
Man of the Year,
I'm thinking
Time
Man
magazine.
of the Year, things like that. That was a slightly different one, sorry. But these prizes and these awards and ceremonies, and obviously even Woman of the Year, including a man now, and so on. So I think all of these ceremonial awards are best avoided. So Trump may be lucky that he's so unpopular with the elite.
Well, I think he's the first U.S. president in however many years that hasn't actively started a war during his presidency. I mean, he's just continued wars that previous presidents undertook. So Barack Obama, he got it as soon as he was inaugurated, and of course he started wars in Libya and Syria. Trump, they're edging him to for him to go to war with Iran on behalf of Saudi Arabia, but he's completely resisted, and so I think that he's done more for peace in that position than any other president I can remember.
Absolutely, and your line there about Obama's wars in Libya and so on reminded me during the presidential debate, or later on, I had American Senator Lindsey Graham say, we need boots on the ground everywhere, and we should be involved in Chad. And then somebody kind of nudged him aside and said, actually, we do have boots on the ground in Chad. We are, the Americans are everywhere. That even the most hawkish Americans don't know where they're involved. So I think it's good to finally have someone pull back a little bit and say, let's see if we can be a little bit less involved and topple less governments, because all of that has not ended well in the past 20 years.
There's another super chat in the Unshackled's YouTube live chat from No Joke 123 for $2 Thank you very much. Though you haven't written anything for me to read out, so thanks for the super chat. But
we're very popular tonight.
Yes. Oh wow. Well, the Right Minds channel, your subs are growing, so you'll eventually get to that 1,000 subscribers you need to receive super chats. Though I haven't spoken to you yet about Entropy, which is a workaround rebroadcasting software which allows you to receive super chats even if you've got 10 subscribers on your channel.
We have more than 10 subscribers.
So. Yes, I'm just making a point.
It is a bit late. It is a little bit late in New Zealand as well this week, of course. So we'll see a bit more activity, but when we're back in the normal time slot.
It was a bit. Obviously, we're going to air a bit earlier in Australia. Everyone was a bit slower to get into the live chat, but they're all there now. So.
Oh, very good. New Zealand also marked a celebration of 70 years of communist rule in China, and the Chinese embassy ran a number of events in Wellington and in Auckland. The Auckland event was attended by the mayor, by Labour MPs, by the National Party chairman, very bipartisan affair. The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters.
Let's have a look. There he is.
Still overseas. He was there in Wellington, and they had a number of national MPs there as well. And you see Winston Peters there with the Chinese ambassador. And one national MP even publicly stated that he was very glad to celebrate the hundreds of millions of people that had been lifted out of poverty by the Chinese government. What a great achievement! It's just to me, it's absolutely disgusting that we have so many high-profile officials openly celebrating a regime that murdered tens of millions of people, has brought despair and poverty to hundreds of millions of people, and is still, to this day, a very oppressive regime. They run, they suppress religion, Christians, Muslims, and over 1 million are imprisoned for their religious beliefs. They're currently, treading over the rights of the people in Hong Kong. And then we have here in New Zealand, meanwhile, the government, the opposition, everybody, holding hands with the Chinese government in celebration, like open celebration of the Communist Party.
Oh, well, if you want to put a more diplomatic, positive spin on what you just described, I mean, it was trial and error. I mean, they tried the first time, collectivization, hundreds, nearly 100 million died. So they learned from that, and they were able to, in the end, lift millions out of poverty. So it was just a trial and error.
Yeah, and to this day, and they say lifted out of poverty, China is finally reached sort of average wealth status for most of its people. If you look at the neighboring countries like the real Republic of China, they're incredibly wealthy. Even the people in Hong Kong are very wealthy. Japan, South Korea, all of these countries are incredibly rich. And so to say that the communist government has done anything to benefit the people in China is just absolute nonsense and, downright evil.
We've got another super chat, another one from Senator Slay Neil Erickson for $2 Australian. Thank you very much. He asks, Bohr, is there any small hats in transhumanism? Do you understand any of that?
I'm not a fan of transhumanism. I can definitely say that.
my colleague Steele Archer will be he'll be quite upset with that, because his detonation program at the moment is all about transhumanism.
Oh well, you can let him know that I'm a staunch traditionalist, and I'm a human supremacist as well. So no transhumanism for me, thank you.
The live chat's just had a meltdown at your revelation there. I'll take over.
I got derailed. Yes, thanks for derailing me there. It's your turn.
Yes, well, I just want to talk about our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison's statement on China. He says that China should no longer be considered a developing nation, that given the amount of wealth that it generates, its military and geopolitical power, the fact that its cities are now full of middle to upper class people, that definition no longer applies. And it's interesting, our Labour Party back here, because they were going all-out attack on the liberal Chinese Australian MP Gladys Liu and her links to Chinese Communist Party linked groups, but now they've gone full back into China apologist mode with Richard Marles, who's the deputy Labour leader. He said, I just went on a 3-day study tour to Beijing, and Scott Morrison's engaging in megaphone diplomacy. It's not right that they're compared to regimes like Nazi Germany. We need to have a better relationship. This government's set it back. And so Labour, they've gone full back into China cheering mode.
I have just been told in my chat that I'm going to get my house raided by the Chinese government now.
We
had that problem last week as well, but I'm still here. I'm definitely still here. My favorite economist in New Zealand actually does compare China to the Nazis on a regular basis. And one of the reasons why China actually advanced out of the Stone Age in the 90s is they did make a bit of a transition to what was kind of called a capitalist economy. We still call it the Communist Party of China, but they have sort of transitioned to a more fascist approach, and that seems to be what's made the difference in getting them off the ground.
And you're using fascism in the actual definition, not in the Antifa sense, because the actual economic definition of fascism is when the government and the or so-called like private sector work in cahoots together to co-manage the economy.
Definitely, yeah. I'm talking about the economic system of fascism as it was intended to be. Basically, has been implemented in China, and that's what's sort of made the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So that Paul Gottfried, he's a philosopher who's written what is the proper definition of fascism. Not that, yeah, because I don't think anybody like in the public knows what it means anymore, just because they've heard it used as a slur so many times.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, it's connected directly with Nazism and racism, and eugenics and so on. But the economic system itself is, definitely is. Look at China's economy, and that's what you'll see. I
Now,
saw as well, Avi. I was got one more thing.
yep.
That's before I was interrupted. I was gonna say I've been watching Avi Yemeni's videos on the Hong Kong protests today, actually, and yeah, just some mind-bogglingly crazy, devotion from Chinese foreign students to the Chinese government. It's their propaganda system, their social credit system is working very, very well, and these Chinese pro-China, pro-Communist Party of China protesters on Avi's show are definitely boosting their social credit scores by huge numbers.
Well, they didn't get there all on their own, those pro-Chinese Communist Party students. I think they got maybe a lift there and a bit of an allowance for going there and saying pro-China things. They didn't just turn up there out of the goodness of their hearts.
Oh, I'm sure of it. And I do feel for the people who, Chinese expats who have family members back home. Of course, even if you're in Australia and in New Zealand, you have to show your love for the government of China, or else your family gets thrown in the gulag.
They probably. Avi probably wouldn't be able to do it in New Zealand much, basically because has there actually been any pro-Hong Kong demonstrations?
Yeah, so there was one, and the Hong Kong students were beaten and bloodied by Chinese students, and then the ACT Party leader David Seymour actually held one pro Hong Kong rally after that, after these students were beaten, and that's the last I've heard of it. That's the last that's made it into the news. And if somebody does know of more Hong Kong protests happening in New Zealand, they can let me know. But I have not seen any more noise about it since then.
Now, the Medicine Man, he's now in the Unshackled YouTube chat because he's just sent us through a super chat of 5 New Zealand dollars, which means it's not worth as much as an Australian super chat.
Careful.
Yeah.
Then.
Yes, he says, Tim, say the following out loud, Jews touch babies. Well, if he's referring to a bris, then yes, that's correct. So that gives you, I was talking about the Medicine Man before, that gives you a bit of an idea about what his channel's about.
Yeah, I did see a comment in our chat which he referred to New Zealand as Jew Zealand. So I gathered that his channel would be quite interesting in that regard.
It's definitely Oriental New Zealand.
No, now we're gonna get banned. Thanks.
All right, now I'm going to talk about our Prime Minister Scott Morrison at the United Nations because, well, the climate strikes in New Zealand, in Australia, they're basically being anti-Scott Morrison, anti-coalition protests because, they always want an excuse to protest the coalition government. And of course, the coalition government, conservative governments, they can never do enough to satisfy the climate activists. And he's been under attack by our media, the ABC, Fairfax, The Guardian. And so he got up at the UN and defended his government's record on climate change because all these government ministers do say they believe in climate change and we've got policies to mitigate it. They do have a renewable energy target and they have signed on to the Paris emissions reductions. It's just not as extreme as the Labour Party. So yeah, they are doing more than what climate skeptics would want them to do, because obviously any sort of emissions reduction, renewable energy subsidies is going to cripple the economy. But no, it's not enough for the climate activists, and we have the Australian Climate Council who've said that they have claimed that Australia is the largest per capita emitter in the world. Basically, that we're the dirtiest polluter in the world, more so than any other nation.
I just saw an article today saying that Australia is actually going to meet its Kyoto Protocol targets. I've almost forgotten that was a thing, but I do remember that prior to whatever Australia has done recently, New Zealand was the only country in the world that had managed to reach those targets. So, and of course it's quite bizarre because we know that China and India and so on and developing nations emit far more greenhouse gases per capita, and it's actually very important that they do, because the greenhouse gases are the way that you develop an economy. Only once you get to the top can you afford to do less of it.
But he did, Scott Morrison, at the United Nations, declare war on plastic. He wants to oversee a new commercial model for recycling plastic, and wants cleaner oceans. And in Australia, most states and territories have banned what are termed single-use plastic bags at the supermarket and elsewhere. It was a big deal about a year ago when the major supermarkets voluntarily introduced a single-use plastic bag ban. I call single-use because they still sell plastic bags, but they're reusable.
Our supermarkets, some of them phased them out and others didn't, but the government just banned them. It was one of Jacinda's great plans in June, July, and they're gone now. All plastic bags are gone. You can only get the tote bags, the cloth material ones, but you can still buy stacks of one-time usable plastic bags, like bin liners and so on.
How much are they? Because at our supermarkets we have 15 cents of their reusable plastic bags.
Okay. As far as I know, the normal rubbish bag. You're talking about the reusable ones. Sorry.
Yeah, they can purchase.
They're like $1, at least $1 each.
Oh, so you have to pay for the full $1.
You have to pay $1 or so to get your bag.
Okay.
What I do when I go to the supermarkets, I have this plastic bag that I've kept from before they banned them. So I walk in with my one-time use plastic bag every time that I come back to the supermarket.
So in your old age, you're going to be like to your grandchildren, this is what we used to use back in my day. It's and it's this grey bag, and it probably wouldn't have disintegrated.
I hope not, but I am afraid that the one I've got is made of that biodegradable plastic, because a lot of the plastic bags a long time ago were turned into biodegradable ones, and so we've ended up that way. The funny thing about recycling of plastic you mentioned is that we send all of our plastic recycling to like the Philippines and Indonesia and China, and what they do is they just dump it into the ocean. So that's how recycling works here in New Zealand. You send it off to the third world and they dump it in the ocean for you.
We've got another super chat from Port Film Co-op for $2 Australian. Thank you for another super chat. He said, "Steel touches robots and they touch steel." Steel.
I've got a chat here as well that makes a little bit more sense. The New Zealand does have Hong Kong rallies. I've been sent a link to their Facebook page. I'm not sure how big they are, but apparently there is a group of pro-Hong Kong protests still happening in New Zealand. So
you read that. You read that out for free, though.
I did. I did ask for the comment.
And going back to Greta Thunberg, because it's after the climate strikes in Australia, it was widely reported that children are suffering what's termed eco-anxiety, and a lot of child psychologists came forward to say that they're actually treating children for this. And Scott Morrison, while he didn't attack Greta Thunberg herself. He said that I don't want children to feel anxious about our future. I want them to feel positive about the future of the planet, and we're going to have a great economy going forward, which is, you know, what you want your leader to be, optimistic. And well, he's the guy on election night who said, how good is Australia? How good is Australians? This is the best country in the world. So yeah, I was glad that he, because it's becoming more apocalyptic. I had Alan Moran on my Wilmsfront program last Wednesday who to talk about just basically how the rhetoric's been ramped up, and the world really is going to end. And of course they've started way younger now with brainwashing the children, who they should be, well, enjoying living in the most technologically advanced age where there are robots that can be used, but they're scared that they're not going to have any future, and there's going to be fireballs ending the earth.
I know, and it's a very tragic situation. But I think there's a good amount of the youth who recognize it as the rubbish that it is, and you see, you know, the ones that are anxious and suffering are the ones that make the news. But obviously there are going to be a huge number of depression cases and even suicides related to all of this climate alarmism, and somebody should be held accountable for all of the misery that they're causing people. And I'm glad that you do have a leader who's proud of his country. It's difficult to get Jacinda to talk about how great New Zealand is because she's too busy talking about her borderless world. While her immigration department is looking to lock down New Zealand's border even more.
Now I've got another super chat here in the Unshackled chat. It's from the Medicine Man again for 10 New Zealand dollars. It says, Tim, how much soy do you put in your cider? Well, you paid for that insult, so joke's on you. There you go.
Excellent.
Now, as I mentioned last week, Scott Morrison, he wasn't only in the United States to attend the United Nations, well, he wasn't there for the climate summit, but to address the General Assembly, but he also got a state dinner from Donald Trump at the White House, which actually the mainstream media in the United States didn't pay much attention to. The mainstream media in Australia was all over it, that it was such an honor for us, but now Scott Morrison's in the US mainstream media because the New York Times, that great, noble, non-biased, fact-checking newspaper they've discovered another phone call that Donald Trump had with a world leader, which was Scott Morrison, and that he asked Scott Morrison, could the Australian authorities cooperate with an investigation his Attorney General Bill Barr is conducting, looking into the origins of the Mueller investigation, because the trigger was actually a meeting in the UK in 2016 between our former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Alexander Downer, who was also the Foreign Minister during the John Howard government. He's recently stepped down from that role. He had this meeting with the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos, who he recently served jail time for lying to the FBI. He told Downer that Russia had access to Hillary Clinton's emails, and this was before they were released by WikiLeaks, or as the New York Times says, the DNC hack was revealed. But Downer only reported this to the FBI after the DNC emails were released. So this is seen as because Trump is being impeached for his Ukrainian phone conversation with the Ukrainian president, where he allegedly put pressure on him to investigate Joe Biden. And so this is being used as another example of Trump abusing his authority to influence foreign leaders to do his political dirty work. That's the spin on it. But is Trump able to have a private conversation with any world leader anymore? They just seem to get leaked all the time.
That's right, and this is not the first call that's been leaked from Australia. You had one when just after the inauguration with your previous Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull.
Yes.
Turnbull. You change your prime ministers too often. And his conversation was leaked, which was a pretty funny conversation. There was one with the president of Mexico that was leaked. And so when I was reading about the Ukraine scandal, one of the things they raised was that the White House had been trying to store these conversations on a secure server, and that was some kind of scandal, like they had something to hide. But clearly, the issue is that these calls keep getting leaked, and it's pretty difficult as a leader to conduct diplomacy if if everything is on the front page of the New York Times the day after you say it to a leader. And I'm actually really glad that the Trump Australia collusion scandal has come to light, because I'm glad to see that Trump has asked Australia to investigate its connections to the Mueller investigation, because Alexander Downer did work with the sort of what I term the international deep state to try and get George Papadopoulos. And if you watch an interview that he's done with Canadian commentator Mark Steyn, it's Steyn, he's done an amazing interview with Papadopoulos, and Papadopoulos actually denies that he told Alexander Downer about the whole Russia having Hillary's emails and so on, because he didn't know at the time. And also that he knew that Alexander Downer was doing something really weird because he had his phone out. So while during this conversation, apparently, Alexander Downer had been asked to entrap George Papadopoulos, and he was sitting there recording Papadopoulos on his phone, trying to look really casual. The whole story with Papadopoulos and everything that they went through to try and bring down the Trump campaign in 2016, I'm glad all of that is coming to light a lot more. And we can see just what they went through to try and take him down before. It's good to see that he's actually hitting back a little bit and asking their corruption to be investigated, because that's really what's happening. They tried to manufacture corruption against him, Alexander Downer, and against Papadopoulos. And what Trump is doing now is asking Scott Morrison, hey, can you look into this actual corruption that went on to start the Mueller investigation? Because they set it up. Right? All of this had been set up. The Steele dossier had been paid for by either the DNC or the Clinton campaign, and there were several different countries involved in trying to create dirt on Trump because they couldn't find any. They made it up.
Well, the Mueller report, it's now been delivered and found no collusion, no obstruction of justice. But in the process, they managed to basically have gotcha charges against a lot of Trump's associates. So George Papadopoulos was just one. There was, of course, Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, his campaign chair, Paul Manafort, who's going to prison, and also Michael Cohen, his former personal lawyer, and now they're going after his current lawyer, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and there's still the court case against Roger Stone, Trump's closest confidant.
That's right. And the Papadopoulos spending 2 weeks in jail for lying to the FBI, which was that he misremembered the date on which he had a meeting with somebody. Right? They put him in prison for 2 weeks for not correctly remembering the date on which he had a meeting with someone, and that was lying to the FBI. And as Mark Steyn, who did the interview with Papadopoulos, said, if it's a crime for you to lie to the FBI, it should be a crime for the FBI to lie to you.
There's another super chat here from the Medicine Man for 10 New Zealand dollars, which I can't read that out. I'm not. You've already been pushing it with your other super chat, so no, I appreciate the super chat, but I can't read that out.
I can read out a free one that I've got in mine here.
Okay.
Tim does some heavy mic breathing at times, so people are enjoying your Darth Vader moments.
Well, because I've got to have the microphone up really loud, otherwise people can't hear me. So that's why they're hearing my. It's because I'm talking so fast. I'm like, was it Grover, that Muppet who talks frantically and then like goes. See, the live chat is half the fun.
It is, and it makes the show. I've really been enjoying it. It's only been a couple of weeks since we've been doing it, but it's going very, very well. Um, have we got anything more, or shall
Yeah,
I start?
I'll just talk about how this alleged pressuring of Scott Morrison by
Go for
Donald
it.
Trump has been interpreted in Australia, because there was the state dinner, and the Australian media and Labor have alleged that he's now parroting Trump's lines on China. And so Labor has come out today and said, "Oh, I think Scott Morrison he's being a bit too cozy with Trump, and he's involving himself in this impeachment that's going on against Trump, and I don't think we should be tied to this. That's not a good look for Australia." Basically saying that you're going to be tainted by being friends with Trump.
Ah, yes. Of course, but the Australian media and the New Zealand media has never been friendly to Trump, and so they're going to spin this any way that they can. Um, the whole topic of Trump's impeachment, of course, is interesting, because the Democrats basically need to run this through as fast as they can. The Republicans need to drag this out for as long as they can. And yeah, I do genuinely hope that the investigations into people like Alexander Downer and people like the groups in the Ukraine. I forget the company that Hunter Biden worked for, but I genuinely hope that some of these people get brought down by these investigations, because they absolutely deserve it.
Yes, but the reason why Trump is in trouble over the Ukraine thing and the Australia thing is because he's being accused of corruption for trying to investigate corruption.
Exactly.
Because his enemies have corruption questions to answer.
That's right. And when the Obama administration ran these investigations into Trump to try and find corruption to begin with, the House Democrats, or was it the Senate Democrats, have similarly asked the Ukraine to investigate corruption and so on. So it's okay for them to ask for investigations into Trump's alleged corruption, but as soon as he asks anybody else to investigate the corruption that we actually know is true, now then suddenly everybody is, everybody who's involved, and the media has been involved to a large extent, they're very upset by this.
Now, you were going to go on to something else before I interrupted you.
Yes, I was. Well, it was sort of my closing item here that I still wanted to discuss.
Yep, go for it.
Was the a development, and I suppose it's a sad note to close on, but I might as well. The High Court in New Zealand has ruled that the Auckland Council venues were not were not breaching the law when they denied Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux their event. So the Auckland mayor managed to successfully shut down an event of two right-wing Canadian speakers, and the courts have ruled that that was not actually a violation of a public interest, and so it now seems that public venues can now selectively deny people based on their political ideology at the behest of the mayor, and there's nothing really much that we can do about it. The Free Speech Coalition has announced they're looking into an appeal. We will see what their fundraising efforts come up with. So the fight for freedom of speech in New Zealand is taken a bit of a blow today, but we carry on.
And probably the most prominent member of that free speech coalition in New Zealand, I'll give a shout out to him, is Jordan Williams, who runs the New Zealand Taxpayer Union. He's very good lobbyist there and annoys a lot of politicians.
I'm glad you brought him up, because then I can finish on a positive note that actually takes us back to the beginning of the show. During the climate strikes, Jordan Williams had his mascot Porky the pig.
Yes, I've seen Porky.
He had him at the climate strike holding up a sign that said "Declare tax emergency now."
Yeah, that's a good one. I remember when I went to the offices during my New Zealand trip, I saw all the photos of Porky, and I was like, yeah, that's how lobbying should be done.
Absolutely.
And they also have a Auckland Ratepayers Union. And now you've mentioned the mayor of Auckland twice, which is Phil Goff, and we talked about the election last week. Has there been any more progress on the campaign?
We're well into voting now. A few percent of the postal ballots have gone back. The Auckland Ratepayers Association did have a pledge to cap rates increases, and John Tamahiri, the guy that we mentioned who is considered to be a bit more of the right-wing candidate and who made a certain famous quote in response to Phil Goff's banning of, gloating about the banning of the speakers, Lauren and Stefan. He has signed up to that pledge along with a few others. But we won't know the outcome of the election until a couple of more weeks, and there's not likely to really be much more happening in that space.
And do you have a prediction? Because it sounds like a bit could be riding on this mayoral race.
Yeah, I mean, getting rid of Phil Goff would be absolutely amazing for Auckland, but all of the predictions are that he will hang on pretty easily, and so. There's a chance of an upset, I suppose, but it seems unlikely at this point.
And if you want to hear what John Tamahiri said that Dewey wouldn't repeat tonight, watch last week's episode. I sort of got the impression you think we're pushing it tonight.
I feel like we have pushed it a little bit tonight, so I'm not going to say it, but you definitely go back and watch last week's show, and we cover it in great detail.
Yeah. All right, that probably wraps up the show for
Excellent.
tonight. Again, our nations were intertwined on the world stage, which is why we started this show, because we always seem to end up in our leaders, Scott Morrison and Jacinda Ardern, end up in the same geopolitical stories.
That's right, and we've everything that happens on one side of the Tasman seems to have some kind of corresponding story on the other side that we can link together. It's been and every week it works together very nicely. So it's I thought we may be stretching it a little bit sometimes, but it's working very well. I'm glad to see that's worked out.
And daylight savings comes to the eastern states of Australia, the southeastern states. So it'll be back 7 p.m. Melbourne time next Tuesday night, and which will be what time? Auckland time.
It's bad. Sorry about that. I had a moment.
Yeah.
I was reading the chat and got distracted. I'm sorry about that. That is back to the usual 9 o'clock Auckland time, 9 p.m. On Tuesday, and right here on the Right Minds YouTube channel, and of course on the Unshackled one as well. And you can go to www.rightminds.nz for my latest articles. And the details of the show, and if I come out with a new podcast episode, all of that will be there. You can sign up to the newsletter, and there's also details for donations there as well. And thank you for being very generous to Tim tonight.
Yeah, everyone's been very generous in the chat tonight, and it's been very active, which is quite pleasing. And I will mention you did 2 great articles on Right Minds. One about Jacinta's globalist speech, and about the climate strikes.
Yes, I have, and there's another article up there today as well. I'm trying to be a bit more regular now and put out some shorter articles, because I keep getting emails from people saying, "Hey, I like your articles. Can you please write more of them?" So, working on it.
Get them to if they want you to do more, tell them to give you some more donations.
Yeah, that's right. I will take money in return for articles.
Now, this is a Tuesday evening, which means that we're in the middle of the weekly Australian alt media lineup. There wasn't a Wilms front on Sunday evening, basically because I got bogged down in research over the Trump-Biden-Ukraine thing, because, as I explained on my social media post, there is just so much fake news that you have to sift through to actually get to the truth to the matter. And it's not just CNN and the New York Times which lies and reports fake news. It's also Wikipedia now. You cannot trust Wikipedia anymore. It's full of distortions and slander. So I've got it, and of course Google. You can't Google things anymore. So you basically got to really dive into every cranny of the internet to get actually any proper information.
You could just do what they do and make it all up.
I want to be a bit better than that.
That's why people listen to the show, of course, to get the facts.
But Wilmsfront, it will be back tomorrow night at its regular time, 7 p.m. Wednesday Melbourne time on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to it and you click the bell to allow notifications so that you know when the show goes live. And then after that, it's Dear Bell Trans weekly live stream over on her Dear Bell Trans channel. Then of course Thursday evening 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time is the Uncackables on its YouTube channel, and then Friday night again it's another Wilmsfront 7 p.m. Melbourne time on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. And of course we've got multiple ways that you can support my content and also the Unshackled. We're on patreon.com/theunshackled. We also have our paypal.me/The Unshackled, and we also have our web membership program at theunshackled.net/membership, and our donation form at theunshackled.net/donate. Also, this show is also on podcast form. It's on my Wilmsfront podcast feed, so if you subscribe to the Wilmsfront podcast, you'll also get the podcast version of this, though you won't get the magic of the live chat, unfortunately, but it's there.
That's all from us, folks. Good night, and we will see you next week.
See you then. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Trans Tasman Talk. To keep up with the latest real news and analysis from the Tasman nations, visit theunshackled.net and rightminds.nz.